says they're gonna burn us out, just like last year at Bombay Street. He says, no, no, no. He says that's not going to happen. He says, we've guns. That's the first time I ever heard of that. He says, we've guns, and we're going to defend the area. There's nobody else going to defend it. The only way to stop this is guns. There's no way to defend these rampaging mobs. So she says, keep the kids in, the children, keep them in. There's going to be a lot of trouble tonight. Yeah, so yeah, I wouldn't say that, I'm this normal human being. How could you be? This has defined me. The troubles, the war, and the conflict has defined me for the rest of my life. I'm scarred and marked for the rest of my life. So I carry that scar. I carry that. My name is Seamus Kearney. He says, right, we're going to change that. He says, it'll no longer be Seamus. It'll be called James or Jim. I says, well, that's not my name. He says, it is, and you're heading to the Loyalist Carrickfergus to a building site. It'll probably save your life.
Come here, Seamus. Thanks very much for sitting down and joining me. I appreciate you taking the time now. Can you give us a bit of an idea of what it was like for you growing up? Because you were kind of coming of age as the time known as the Troubles was kind of getting going. Can you give us an idea of growing up in Belfast at the time?
We lived over in it was an area called Ballymacarrett in East Belfast, and sometimes known as St Matthews. That's where I was born, 4 Khartoum Street. And my father, he worked in the shipyard for a while. He was one of the token Catholics. The vast majority of those who worked in the shipyard were Protestants. And around there, you had a lot of industry going on around there in East Belfast at the time, Seraca Works, shipyard, etc. But they were all employed. Most of them were Protestant workers. But we lived in an enclave known as the Short Strand or Ballymacarrett or St Matthews, same area. It held about 3,500 nationalists or Catholics, and we were then completely surrounded by Protestants. And they had a history of sectarianism as far back as the 18th century. So there was always trouble. And the previous trouble would have been about 1920 to 22. But this period we're talking about in the lead up to the Troubles, which commenced in August 1969, was it was around mid 60s where we were growing up, just prior to the Troubles actually breaking out. But even then, there was always tension because you were always getting chased, and you were always being discriminated against. You felt it, and when my father was paid off from the shipyard, he ended up doing labouring on Townsend Street, which was an area at the bottom of the Lower Falls. And he actually tried to apply for the police, the RUC. And he was a big guy, 6'1", and fit. But he was turned down. He had perfect eyesight, but he was turned down. And on his application form, it says refused because of poor eyesight. So they were using all sorts of methods to keep Catholics out of work and keep them subjugated. And so I went to St Matthew's Primary School, and then later went to St Augustine's on the Ravenhill Road and the secondary school. But it was again in a Protestant area on the Ormer Road, and we were always you always had to run a gauntlet from St Augustine's School on the Ravenhill Road down to Short Strand. You used to get a bus, and sometimes the bus was stoned, or when you were getting off, you were getting chased. You're always getting chased by Protestants, and they're always calling you Fenian. And Fenians were another word for Taig or Catholic. And but very similar to the Deep South in America around that time. Probably on a lesser scale because Northern Ireland the north of Ireland was pretty small. But the same type of discrimination was going on. You weren't allowed to fly the tricolour, the Irish flag. You were allowed to fly the Union Jack, the British flag, but you weren't allowed to fly the Irish flag. And one time, for example, in 1964, September 64, they were known as the Tricolour Rats, and that's when a flag appeared in a shop like a Republican shop at the bottom of the Lower Falls, and it appeared anyway in the window. And Ian Paisley, and the Protestants, they demanded that the RUC remove it. So the RUC done as they were told. They tried to remove the flag, and there was a rat, and it was known as the Tricolour Rats. And so that's the type of thing. Even for flying a flag, it would cause a riot. So the RUC, or the police, they referred to that as a breach of the peace. And under the Flags and Emblems Act, you weren't allowed to fly the national flag. So you were completely subjugated. You didn't hold, you couldn't hold a proper job. Catholics got labouring jobs, and they certainly were not allowed into the shipyard. Although my father was a token Catholic, he was allowed in for a while, but then sacked. And he was a brass moulder, but he was sacked, and he was basically told that it was a dying trade, and that no longer any need of him. So they were using all sorts of methods, gerrymandering. For example, a businessman. Businesses were held by the vast majority of them were Protestants, and they held businesses. Very few Catholics would hold a business in the north of Ireland at that time. This is the period, the 50s and the 60s. And so a Protestant businessman could have 4 or 5 votes, even though he was just one businessman. So they were maneuvering, and they used all sorts of insidious methods to hold on to power. And that actually originated as far back as 1921. So on December the 6th, 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. And after a war on the island of Ireland, which commenced in January 1919 and it ended in July 1921. But significantly, in January of 1921, in 10 Downing Street, the then Prime Minister Lloyd George, he asked his military commander in Ireland, could he crush the IRA at that time? So we're talking 1921. Could he crush them? This is January 1921. Could he crush the IRA, because he didn't want to negotiate with them and to restore peace in Ireland? And the GOC land forces said he could. Give him another 6 months and he would crush the IRA. But he failed. And by July, the Lloyd George had them round the table again and said, right, I'm going to sue for peace here. And so in July 1921, there was a ceasefire. And out of that, you had the negotiations commencing between the IRA and the British. And eventually that resulted in the December the 6th, 1921 treaty, which divided the country. And that would have affected me and my family. That was a blueprint for disaster for the North, not the South. The South were going to get 26 counties. There's 32 counties on the island of Ireland. 26 counties were going to be free as a result of this treaty of December the 6th, 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty. In the North, 400,000 Catholics would be cut off from the motherland, and they were going to be hammered. They were going to get punished for falling on the wrong side of the demarcation line. So that 400,000 included my family, and so they were basically ostracized, and they were going to be punished because a new Protestant government for Protestant people would be formed. It was going to be artificially manufactured because they wanted an inbuilt majority, which they believed would last 1,000 years. So this was going to be their glorious state, and it would be a Protestant government for Protestant people, and it would be like a golden age for the Protestant people, and this Protestant ascendancy would last forever, 1,000 years. And so they got rid of, for example, in the province of Ulster was going to become Protestant, and it would fall under the treaty. But there was an inbuilt. It wasn't an inbuilt Protestant majority with the historic province of Ulster, because that included Cavan, Monaghan, and Donegal. So they decided, right, under the Boundary Commission, we'll give Cavan and Monaghan and Donegal, give them to the south so that we could have our inbuilt majority. And that's what happened. So it ended up with 6 counties with a Protestant majority. And that continued from 1921 right through. There was a whole period of discrimination against the Catholics in the north, the 400,000 that were cut off. And that continued throughout the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. The IRA tried to break the link in Operation Harvest in 1956, but it failed to gain popular support, and it pattered out in 1962, 63, and that was known as the Border Campaign, or Operation Harvest. So post 1963, post Operation Harvest, you had a whole discrimination continuing, and under Special Powers Act, etc. They really had our they really had their jackboot on our neck, and you know, we were completely on our knees. So in 1969, that's when the conflict broke out. You had civil rights marches in
I'm sorry
1968,
to
October
interrupt.
68.
So could you remind us what year were you born again? Just to put it in context.
When I was born 1957. 1957, I was born. So by 67, 10 years later, you had the civil rights marches started. They started around 1968, civil rights, and they were being battened off the streets. They were basically asking for simple things, like they weren't asking for a united Ireland or an end of the partition. They were just simply asking for one man, one vote. They were just asking for the democratic initiative to be applied, but they were met with Protestant and Unionist hostility, supported by a British government who, up until then, had taken their eye off the ball. In London, they basically allowed them to have a free reign, this artificial state called Northern Ireland, and they were running their own state, and they were using it. You know, they basically were discriminating against their Catholic neighbours. So in 1969, you had the war starting. The IRA wasn't in place. The IRA was actually selling guns to the Free Wales Army by 1968, and they were going in a different direction because of the border campaign, or Operation Harvest, 1956 to 63. Because it had failed, the military campaign had failed. They were disillusioned, and the IRA were more or less defunct. Whatever weapons they had, they were selling them off to the FWA, Free Wales Army, and so they were going in a more Marxist. Cahill Golding was OC at the time, officer commanding of the IRA at the time, 1960, 68 and 69. And they were going down a road of sort of electoral intervention. You know, they were moving away anyway from a nationalist point of view. They were moving away. They were moving into more international revolutionary, international revolutionary party. They were trying to become, and then this happened out of the blue. The people were their houses were burnt out in Bombay Street. They had the Battle of the Bogside. Basically, people were angry. It was a whole eruption of civil disorder, nothing to do with the IRA, and this was just coming from the base up, the nationalist people, and it was spontaneous and wasn't organised. And out of that, you had the Protestants backlashing. They burned out Bombay Street. The RUC went in with a heavy hand to quell the disorder in Derry, Battle of Bogside, and in Belfast, Bombay Street. And then out of that, you had the British arriving in August 1969. So the British were there. They said they were there as like a UN peacekeeping force, and they were going to try and separate the two sides, the two warring factions, Protestant and Catholics. They were trying to see this as a holy war, which it wasn't. It was territorial. And so you had August 69 with the conflict starting, and the British have arrived.
Okay, so you were kind of growing up. You were growing up as like it was heating up, as it was building up to that point. And you mentioned that kind of all through your life, you remember there being like sectarianism, and you remember being different because you're Catholic and stuff. Was there ever a time growing up, like maybe in your teens and preteens, that you'd have still been able to be friends with Protestants, or they wouldn't mind being friends with you? Was there ever a time when there was kind of an intermingling?
For me, apparently there was. I can just speak about my own life experience. For me, no. We went to St. Augustine School, so it was always very segregated society. And this rubbish about Catholics used to go to the bonfires, I don't know where that came from. Or we used to celebrate the 12th. That's not true. It might have happened on a individual basis, but in general, the doors would have been closed in the short strand. People would have people would have stayed in their houses while the orange bands walked past or marched past. There was, for example, they were outside the chapel. We lived behind St. Matthew's Church in 12 Lorry Street, and you could hear them from the road shouting and bawling, "Yous Fenian effers, yous Fenian this, kick the Pope. You shouldn't be up in the north, you should be down south, yous Fenian effers." Oh my God. It was just, they were so it was so vitriolic. So my mum used to keep us in while that was going on, that period of the 12th of July, the marching season, which usually started around April and carried on into September. So it was a hell of a long summer for us. Or we used to head off to Killock in County Down, a seaside resort, to get away from them and their sectarianism. But so no, it was all, we have all bad memories of that. In living where I lived, totally surrounded by up to 40, 50,000 Protestants, 3,500 Catholics being subjugated and corralled in a small enclave. So, for example, in 73, I left school, and I went, my cousin got me into an electrical firm called G. McFall and Company in Great George's Street. And when I went in, this is an example of what I'm trying to explain. The managing director said, have you got 6 junior certificates, Kearney? I said, yeah, I got that in St. Augustine's. They're abolished now, but they were known as junior certificates, but I had 6 of them anyway. And then after that, you had O levels and A levels. And he says, right, that's good. He says, you seem to be quite intelligent. So what's your full name? I says, my name is Seamus Kearney. He says, right, we're going to change that. He says, it'll no longer be Seamus, it'll be called James or Jim. I says, but that's not my name. He says, it is, and you're heading to the loyalist Carrickfergus to a building site. It'll probably save your life. So I've had led 2 lives. I've had a life where people know me as Jim or James Kearney, and other people know me as Seamus Kearney. My real name is Seamus Kearney, but I've led a dual role from I was 16, and sometimes at work I run my own business, electrical business, even up until today. And people wouldn't know me as Seamus Kearney; they would know me as James Kearney, James or Jim, and that came about as far back as when I was 16, when the firm manager or the owner of the firm, George McFall, G. McFall, changed my name to Jim or James, and because I was going to a loyalist area to work in Carrickfergus, a building site. And that's the type of thing, you had to change your name. The Seans became John, the Seamus became James. You know, they didn't have to change their name. Mervyn or Trevor, or, you know, their names remained the same. They had nothing to fear. It was, we had the fear. We had the fear the change of name. We had to change our name to suit them or to protect ourselves. So that's just a small example of the type of discrimination and the type of fear that we were living under.
Sorry,
as I say,
you touched on it. You touched on it there, but some of the things that you would have seen as like a teen or a young teen. I mean, for example, this thing about like mobs, like sectarian mobs coming in and burning out an area, running people out of their homes. It's, when you think about it, it's an incredibly it's an incredibly like traumatic thing for anyone to go to literally be ran out of your house by a mob, you know.
yeah.
That must have had a like a huge effect on you.
Yeah, well, that actually came the following year, 1970, and that was June the 27th. That's ingrained in my psyche. Yeah, so yeah, I wouldn't say that, you know, I'm this normal human being. You know, how could you be? You know, this has defined me. The troubles, the war, and the conflict has defined me for the rest of my life. I'm scarred and marked for the rest of my life. So I carry that scar. I carry that stigma. But I accept it. But I wouldn't say, oh, I'm a very normal human being. I try to be normal, but after going through that type of trauma, I don't think you can be totally normal. And can you ever recover from it? Probably not. However, there's a richness there, is because I have the ability to articulate. I have the ability to confide to people like yourself, John, what it was actually like. I have this like a photographic memory. It's like flashbacks all the time, and I can actually, when I talk, I'm not actually talking about it. I'm reliving it. I've actually got a strange capacity to do that, and that's out of the trauma. So the trauma sort of bubbles up now and again, and I'm able to articulate that trauma, which people have told me is very vivid, and it's very it's as if they're there with me, and that's because of the trauma. So there's always an emotional cost to the trauma, but then the benefit is people from this generation, from people who haven't experienced it, they actually start feeling it, you know, they can actually, they don't really, I relive it, but they feel that that whole reliving experience. But for example, in August, June, they arrived in August 1969. British troops, combat troops, all arrived into Short Strand, into the north, and they appeared outside our school, St Matthew's Primary, and there was a honeymoon period where my mum would always give them tea, because she thought, well, they're going to help us, they're going to save us, and against the hated RUC, who we referred to as SSRUC. They were a sectarian force who supported and propped up the the Ulster government at Stormont, and so we were glad to see them. I wasn't particularly, but the people in the area were, I have to say, they were giving them tea and buns, and that honeymoon period for us lasted right through until the following year. So from August 1969 to the following June 1970, and as I say, I'm talking about the Short Strand area where I lived. I'm talking about life experiences. I was an eyewitness to this, and what I remember, and so I'm not talking in the abstract. I'm talking about real situations here, what I experienced, and when in the following year, June the 27th, they assembled outside the church on the Newton Arch Road. There was over 1,000 of them, and they were shouting and bawling that they were going to storm the chapel and burn us out. Our street was a small street. We were situated just behind the chapel, so that meant if they storm that chapel, they're going to end up burning our street out. They're going to burn us out, and so they're going to rape all them women as well while we're at it. So you were completely vulnerable. There was a regiment of soldiers there, so we thought they'll protect us, but they pulled out. So they were asked a few days later by journalists like Simon Winchester, why did you pull out of the Short Strand area when those 3,500 people were completely exposed to these loyalist thugs and gangsters? And there was a drunken mob were going to storm the chapel. Why did you pull out? And the commanding officer, I think it was the Anglican regiment, he said there was trouble elsewhere in the city, and that we were stretched. We couldn't protect the church, and we couldn't protect the area, so we pulled out, which left us completely vulnerable. So they assembled that afternoon, 27th of June 1970, and they were shouting and bawling, and they were getting ready for to storm the chapel that night. So my uncle George, he lived in Chemical Street. He came round. My mum's distraught, and he says, "Kathleen, calm down. It'll be all right." He says, "What do you mean it's all right?" He says, they're gonna burn us out, just like last year at Bombay Street." He says, no. He says, that's not going to happen. He says, "We've guns." That's the first time I ever heard of that. He says, "We've guns, and we're going to defend the area. There's nobody else going to defend it. The only way to stop this is guns. There's no way to defend these rampaging mobs." So she says, "Keep the kids in, the children, keep them in. There's going to be a lot of trouble tonight." And at 11 o'clock that night, that's the first time I ever heard gunfire. All you heard was bang, 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 bang. My mum came up the stairs. We were in the back room. I got up and looked out through the window, and I could see the side of the church. Couldn't actually see onto the road, but could see the side of the church. And my school, St Matthew's Primary, I could see past that, and all you heard was the shooting. And it was about 11 o'clock it started. My mum came up the stairs. She says, "Is that shooting?" Here's me. "I think so." She says, "Get under the bed, the three of us." So there was three boys. There was myself, Michael, and Sean, and my sister Anne. She got under her single bed, and we got under our bunk bed, three of us, and we lay there all night under the bed. So I was 13, and they were 11, and that shooting went on all night. Scary, like, you know, it was just, you were waiting on them coming in. You didn't know who the hell was shooting, but it went on all night. It was a gun battle, and it went on all night. And about it started getting light around about 5, and I got up and looked out the window, and it was all red glow coming from the front of the road, like there was fire. And then I heard another burst of gunfire, like bang, 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 bang. And then it must have been the IRA, because I heard the guy shouting, "You come any closer, you orange bastards, and we'll not be firing over your heads." And so that day, the next day was Sunday. We all went to mass, but we couldn't get to the front of the church because it was sealed off, and we had to go into the side entrance, and the place looked like a battlefield. It was like a Second World War, and there was fires blazing. The Saxons' houses was smouldering. The front gates were knocked down. I don't know. Nobody really knew what happened, but it then started to filter out that the provisional IRA, and people were going, "Who are they?" Well, they had come over, and they had joined up with the CDC, which was like a local defence, well, like vigilantes, just men defending the church. My dad would have been there. Only my dad had died on the 2nd of June 1967, so he would have been there, but he had died of a brain hemorrhage a few years earlier. But my cousins were there, which was the likes of Jimmy George and Johnny and people like that. And they later told my mum that because she wanted to know what happened, so he called around later, a few days later, and said the area is defended, we've saved the area. And she said, what happened? And my uncle Johnny said, he says they stormed out of the McMahon's pub like maniacs, and they were shouting about raping the fucking women and burning the church down. I had this thing about the Catholic Church in the Loyalist area on the Narge Road. It was like a magnet to them. They wanted to burn it out, and they wanted to get rid of the popery. You know, they're shouting all this rubbish about kill the Catholics, kill, F the Pope, burn the church. They hated the fact that the church was sitting in a Loyalist area on the front of the Narge Road, and they wanted it. They always were into to try to do it in 1920, 21, and then they were at it again in June 1970. But it says when they stormed the church, they were on the railings, and then out of the blue, a gunman stepped forward, and he was in the provisional IRA, and he opened fire with a submachine gun, raked it, and that stopped them. They couldn't believe it. They were shouting, "Those effing Fenians have got guns," as if to say, "How dare you resist? How dare you?" In other words, we were meant to lie under our beds and allow them to come in and torch the houses and kill whoever they wanted. That's what, and being supported by the RUC, they were supporting them that night. The police were supporting them. So we were expected to just accept it and to lie the way we had been up to then for 50 years, from 1921 right up until 1970. Lick it up, suck it up, accept it. Yous are only Fenians and Catholics, and lie down and let us walk over you. But that was their attitude, because they were shouting, "Them Fenians have got guns." In other words, how dare yous? How dare yous resist? And that was the first form of resistance, really, since 1921.
Okay,
And
sorry. So just to put a bit of context on the situation that you're in, you're very much discriminated against being a Catholic. There's violence. There's attempts to run you out of the areas. The police force at the time were seen as being no help whatsoever. They were on the side of the loyalists.
no,
And
they were all Protestant. They
right,
were Protestant.
the army, no, they were kind of a token gesture. They didn't actually help. Okay, so I could understand people resorting to the only other option you have, which is like a paramilitary group. Did that play into your own decision to eventually join? And when was that? When did you first try to join?
Well, our public opinion from the national side started changing after that, 1970. After the Battle of St. Matthews, people were starting to say, God, if the British Army, who were meant to come in as a UN peacekeeping force, can't keep them back, then, and they can't defend us, then there was a whole loss of confidence in the British Army, and opinion changed against them. But probably the most pivotal moment was the following month, in July 1970, when the Brian Faulkner government says, let's find out where did they get those guns. They were more interested not in defending us. They were interested in where did the guns come. So let's disarm these people. And they wanted the Faulkner sent in the British Army to recover the guns from the Battle of St. Matthews. And they stormed, well, that was one of the reasons. And so they feared a resurgent IRA from the Operation Harvest from 56-63 campaign. So they were alarmed at the fact that they were shooting Protestant people. That's how they seen it. But we seen it from a different perspective. We seen it as defending ourselves. They defended the area, and it was a provisional IRA that did that. So they gained a lot of kudos for that. They got a lot of brownie points, the provisional IRA, for defense of that area. And so people were now saying they're the ones that did that, along with the the Citizens Defence Committee, small group of vigilantes from St Matthews, but they worked alongside the provisional IRA, and their commander at that time was Billy McKee in that area. He wasn't the chief of staff of the provisional IRA, but he was the Belfast commander, and he had come over, Billy McKee, and he had defended the area, and we went, that's fantastic. And even my mum was saying, good on him. There was actually a song coined from that battle called "The Boys of St Matthews," and I remember I memorized the words. I sang the song, and it was known as "The Boys of Carmichael." Or sorry, it was "The Boys of St Matthews," and it was to
Michael, what I know that's actually
it was actually to the tune of "The Boys of Carmichael," and it was known as "The Boys of St Matthews." You know, so they were getting a lot of respect for defending the area, and the British Army were losing the respect. So that's what was happening. It was a transformation taking place, despite the the prior honeymoon period that the British Army experienced from August 69.
At this stage, because the IRA, of course, later went on to be known, you know, for some things that I think a lot of people wouldn't agree with, like, you know, like bombing innocent people, and even the likes of punishment shooting, punishment beatings. At this point, it doesn't sound like any of that was going on. They were just kind of a group that was like defending people's areas, right?
Yeah,
it hadn't evolved into a more.
So that's why you have to take this history, this narrative. I call it the battle of the narrative, because whatever I say, there's always a counterbalance. You'll always have somebody saying something completely different, which is fair enough. But I'm just telling you, I don't need a counterbalance. I can just tell you this is my. Am I prejudiced? I wouldn't say I'm an impartial, a totally impartial person. No, I'm basically in every war, which was about to happen, as the man said, in Operation Anthropoid, pick a side. He was referring to the Second World War and the occupation of Czechoslovakia, and he says, Jan Kubiš said, take a side. You can't sit on a fence during a war. Yeah, you have to pick a side, and I picked a side. So I was never going to sit on the fence, and I was never going to be mediocre. I was never of that ilk. I actually didn't like people who were mediocre. I used to say to my mum and my dad, why are you accepting this? And Eddie McIntyre, at the time, who was in the Nationalist Party, said a half a loaf is better than none. Take it. A half a loaf is better than none. And I used to go, no. Why cannot we get a first slice of the cake? Why are we being treated like slaves and second class citizens in our own country? I was even aware of that even then, you know, and growing up, because I just seen it was so wrong, and I wasn't gonna be an apologist for the Ulster Unionists or the Protestant ascendancy, no, and so I knew there was going to be a conflict after the Battle of St Matthews, and I knew somebody had to pick it. I didn't pick a side then. I was a bit young, but the side I decided to come off the fence in January 1972, which was the Bloody Sunday. That there was a defining moment for a lot of my peers, a lot of my generation, a lot of guys who were my age around that time, 15, 16. So by January 72, I was 15. And at the end of January 72, that was the defining moment. So you had the Battle of St Matthews and the IRA on a defensive role. 1971, with internment, the IRA went on the offensive, and they basically went from defense to offense from about 71 on. So there was different phases of struggle, and now the first phase, 69, they weren't about. They were on the walls was IRA, I ran away. You failed to defend your own areas. So they were known as cowardly in 69. 70, that all changed with the Battle of St Matthews. And the IRA had gained their battle spurs by defending the area. 71, August 71, they were on the offensive. The IRA decided to move from defense to offense. And that was a strategic decision made by the IRA, because ultimately they wanted to, at the end, partition. and to end the wrong of 1921. So yes, they seen that as a that there was no that Northern Ireland was a failed political entity, and they had always believed that. But this time they were getting popular support, which they had failed again in Operation Harvest. Popular support was now on the side of the IRA, and the IRA grabbed it with both hands and went on the offensive in 1971. Internment, 9th of August 1971, they tried to stop them, and Brigadier Marston Tickle at the time said this is only a sweeping up operation. We've crushed the embryonic provisional IRA. We've stopped it. We've nipped it in the bud, and but he was wrong, because the internment was just going to be another catalyst. And 1972, the end of January 72, Battle of the Bog, or sorry, the Bloody Sunday, when the paratroopers killed 14 innocent people, all hell broke loose. Even within our house, myself, Michael, and Sean were watching that on TV, the news coming out of Derry. My mum actually got up and switched the TV off because we were so enraged. And she says, right, that's enough, go to your room. But when we went to the room, the three of us were in the room, and Michael said to me, you going to accept that? He says, accept what? He says, they're murdering our people. And that's how we seen that. They were our people. You know, it wasn't strangers in Derry. They were our people, and they were being shot down like dogs by a parachute regiment. And I said, no, I don't think you're sitting on the fence is an option anymore. And here's Michael. You know, I'd like to think so. And I joined the IRA. I joined the Fianna Fáil in May of that year, 1972. Would have joined earlier, only there was that many security lectures you had to go through, and it was hard to get into it, vetting. And but anyway, I got in May 1972. I was a junior wing because I was only 15, but given oaths of allegiance to the Irish Republic, and that was in May 1972, and the Fianna Fáil, it was like a junior wing. You get arms training. Yes, we were getting arms training on like the German Walther P38 and the M1 carbine, and you were taught how to strip the weapon down. And but this wasn't the case even at 15, where you're going to be looking at the weapon, you're going to be using it, and that was emphasized. You're going to be using these weapons. You're not going to be looking at them. You're going to be using them. So you're being trained to use them. So so from that age, 15, I was getting trained on firearms and how to use them, and then on formation parades, and you know, we were becoming soldiers, and became a child soldier when I was 15. When I think about it, and we were shadowing the IRA guys and the gun crews. So I would have been going out with gun crews and to engage with the British in gun battles. I would have been carrying their weapons and things like that. Wasn't actually firing them, but it was with them. And so that was a decision that I made, and it came about as a result of Battle of St Matthews, June 1970, August 71, 9th of August internment, and then finally Bloody Sunday, where we decided we've had enough. Civil rights weren't working, and the democratic initiative was not being gained through the civil rights movement. And as Evan Cooper said after Bloody Sunday, he says, I want to address the British government. He says, you know what you've done? I actually watched him on TV, and here's me to myself. He's talking about me. And he says, you know what you've done? He says, what you've done today on Bloody Sunday, killing those people. He says, you've destroyed the civil rights movement, and you've given the IRA its greatest victory. He says, tonight all over the city and beyond, he says, young men, some of them are mere boys, are lining up to join the IRA, and you will reap a whirlwind. And I decided they are going to reap a whirlwind for that. That was my attitude, I'll be honest. I was saying they're going to be punished, the British, for being here on Irish soil, and you are going to be punished for what you've done. And a lot of my peers thought the same. A lot of guys who were joining the Fianna Fáil at my age were saying the same. Bloody Sunday, Bloody Sunday. We all had this shamrock, and on the shamrock badge it said in black 13. There was 13 dead, and we all carried that. And that was our raison d'etre for joining the IRA or the Fianna Fáil. The murder of 13 innocent people in Derry. A 14th person died later, but initially there was 13 dead. Altogether 14 dead. So we seen that as an affront to us, and we were decided, well, we're going to take on the British Army here. We were idealists. We were You know, we were young guys, but we were lads. We were lads, and we were going to do a war to fight this war, and to the bitter end. And the best soldiers actually came from that whole period, 1971, 72, of the Fianna and the 15, 16-year-olds, because we later joined the IRA when we became 17 and 18, and we were the best soldiers. And as it turned out, we were, by the time we hit the H blocks and took on the biggest battle of the entire war, we seen ourselves as elite troops, political soldiers.
I see. Okay, so you initially join up in the youth wing. You're about 15.
72.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned like one of the roles would be kind of a supporting role. Like you might hold and transport a gun for a member that was going to use it. What other duties is like a junior member doing in those years before you become old enough to be a proper member?
Right. You'll have been taken down south and trained on the weapons down south, but not always. You would have been taken to safe houses in West Belfast, and then showed from the IRA men. They would have come in and said, right, this is how the Walther P38 works. This is how that's what it's gas operated or cooled. It went through all the techniques of the weapon, taking it down, the type of ammunition, and then you would have had a test fire down south. What's the weapons? Not up in north. Taken down south and trained. You would have been on stag, as they called it, stag duty, which would have been like staying up all night with the weapon to protect the camp down south and the Republic. And as well as that, you would have been doing parades, Easter parade. You would have been dressed up in the black berets or green berets, and then doing parades, drilling, a lot of drilling. And then gun lectures and also political lectures about why you were fighting and the reason. They didn't really want sectarian volunteers. People, some of the group, some of them would be calling them Protestants blue noses, or let's get into the blue noses, the loyalists, and they were basically told, get out. It's not about that. It's about being a Republican, and it's about a historic battle, an historic struggle, an 800-year struggle. We would have been told as far back as Strongbow, giving you lectures on Irish history, a lot of lectures, a lot of drilling, training camps, the operation of how jobs actually operated, ambush positions, how to set up an ambush, also doing dicker, as the Brits called it. The British Army called us dickers, which meant scouts. Before an operation, we would be standing at street corners. We would have been watching for the army to arrive, and then report back to the gun team, who would have been sitting in a house, saying they're coming up Carrigard Avenue. There's 6 of them, and then there's a backup of 4 behind that. And they were saying, so we would be like intelligence gathering and telling the IRA guys with the weapons where they were, where exactly the British foot patrols were coming in, where they were coming, and and then they needed that. They needed sort of scouting. So we've done a lot of scouting in the areas, building up intelligence gathering. Many times the Brits went into the fort when they went in, and that type of thing. So we're sort of intelligence gathering as well.
Okay, very good. So then at the age of about 17 or so, you were you're able to join up with the proper
75.
Okay, very good. What was the difference, and what was there a very tangible kind of difference in feel in terms of what you're doing? Did it get a lot more serious?
Yeah, there was 3 of us who applied at the same time, and I was knocked back a couple of times. But I don't know why. This guy that I was trying to make contact with, I was still in the Fianna, was trying to join the army. He says, stay in the Fianna. Here's me why. He says, you're going to be safer there, But I don't know. He didn't seem to be pushing it. And he says, sure, come back to me in 2 or 3 months. So come back to him in 2 or 3 months. He says, he seemed to be eager enough. There was an older man he was a recruiting officer for the IRA. And he says, is anybody pressurizing you? No. Is it a peer group? Is it a group of you? No, it's just me. All right. Sure, come back in another couple of months, or stay in the Fianna. Here's me, 18. He says, getting too old for the Fianna. He says, right, okay. So eventually, anyway, he says, you have to go to a house in Andersonstown where you'll meet somebody else. and there was three of us. There was me and two others, and we were sitting in the house, and the guy walked in, grey-haired guy, and he says, "Right, this isn't the Féin. He says, what you are trying to join is the ugly Nahuran, the Irish Republican Army provisionals. It's not the sticky backs. It's not the official IRA. They're on ceasefire. This is a warrior class and cost. So I need to explain to you. You're going to go through a series of lectures, and hopefully by the end of those lectures, you'll know exactly where you are. And if you aren't fit for this, then get out of it." And the one of the guys who had been in the auxiliary IRA, it was like a Dodds Army auxiliaries. He eventually, by the third lecture, says to him, he just said it in the living room. He says, "I don't think this is for me. I don't think I'm fit for this. It's not what I imagined. So I'm not going any further." So he bailed out, and there's two of us left. And by the third security lecture, and it was explained to us that this was not an Féin. This was active service. Now, there was a possibility you could join, an opportunity to join the intelligence department, and I met them, and they says basically what you'd be doing, you'd still be technically in the provisional IRA, but you'd be intelligence gathering, and you wouldn't be in the front line, you'd be intelligence gathering. I didn't really want that, so some guys went into intelligence, but I didn't, and just felt that I wanted to be a soldier, and I'd been at this when I was 15. I wanted to be in the front line of the war, and so by that they were sort of discouraging you. They weren't actually promoting you, and but anyway, by the third or fourth lecture, he says, "Right, you've been offered intelligence, you've knocked it back. You're too young to be in the auxiliaries," which was like an administration who carried out punishment shootings and things like that. Didn't want to join the auxiliaries, no, because well, they were sort of for older guys, and so that leaves active service. And what that means is, if you're lucky, you'll get about 6 months in the front line. If you're lucky, and you'll either be killed in active service or you'll go to prison for a long time. That's what awaits you. You're going to end up in Milltown Cemetery, and you're going to be buried 6 feet under, and your family's going to be distraught. Your family are going to be broken, and that's what awaits you. So, do you really want that? And he asked us, there was two of us, and the other guy said, "Yeah, I can accept that. I know what I'm going into, but it has to be done. And I know that if I die, then well, people behind me will benefit from it. Hopefully, that's if we win. But if we don't win, then it's going to be another glorious defeat, like Operation Harvest." So he says, "What about you, big lad?" And I says, "Well, I can hack active service. I'll do active service, and if I die, then I die. I accept it, and I don't expect to live to 30 anyway. Who the hell wants to live to 30 anyway? I didn't want to live to 30, and I accepted my own death." And so we were definitely a different breed, where we didn't see ourselves living beyond 30. The 30 was like, once you hit 30, you're an old man. What do you want to live beyond that for? So our attitude was have a glorious victory or a glorious defeat. We didn't care. We just wanted to get out and to leave our mark and to fight the British and to basically get our people off their knees, because we knew our people were on their knees and we wanted them off their knees. And the only people who were able to do that would be us. And this is the only way forward, seeing there was no other method. And he says, "Right, okay, so you've accepted your own death." Yes. And eventually I got into the IRA. They accepted it, give the oath of allegiance. Similar to the oath they give in May 1972 to the Féin, an oath of allegiance to the Republic and to protect the IRA against domestic and foreign enemies, etc. Same type of thing was given. You put your hand on the national flag and you swore allegiance to the Republic, and that's what happened. And I was now in the IRA. I was sort of happy. I was content. I actually went to mass and thank God that I got in, because I'd asked him, I'll do my best, I'll give it my best shot, and I'll do my best, my very best, to fight for Ireland and to get Ireland's freedom and to get our people off their knees, to get equality, to get justice for our people. I was really believed in that. And at mass under the crucifix in St. Malachy's Chapel in the Markets area, I says, "Give me the chance to get in here and help me to do the right thing." And that's how I've seen it. It wasn't a holy war, but I believed in God and I believed in spiritual forces. And I just felt this is the I wanted to help my people.